Hey fearsome friends, some truly disturbing stories for you tonight. From male Karens, axe-wielding maniacs, and dodgy dog walkers, here's 16 stories to lull you to sleep. So sit back, relax, and get cozy, comfy, warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. Now I'm Irish, and if you didn't already know, during the 70s and 90s, there was a conflict in Northern Ireland between various paramilitary groups and government forces, and these conflicts became known as the Troubles. Northern Ireland is officially part of the UK, but many people living there consider themselves to be Irish instead of British. This, of course, led to division in the region between the mostly Catholic Irish Republicans and the mostly Protestant Ulster Loyalists. There were many paramilitary groups on both sides during the conflict, the most famous of them being the Irish Republican Army, but there were many others that weren't as famous internationally, particularly on the Loyalists' side. One such group was the Ulster Defence Association, which was newer than other Loyalist groups, but still as violent. And now for the story. Before I was born, during the mid-90s, my parents decided to visit a friend of theirs for the day in Belfast, which is a city in Northern Ireland. Their friend lived in a Protestant neighbourhood, and my dad is noticeably Catholic, since he's from Southern Ireland, and his accent gives it away as well. My parents took the train into Belfast, and when they arrived, they went to a local pub for lunch before setting off to their friend's house. As they were coming up to the house, my mother noticed that people were giving them dirty looks from all directions, and when they tried to ask one of the locals for directions, the person in question just ignored them and walked on. My parents finally arrived at their friend's house, where greetings and other pleasantries were exchanged, as their friend invited them in. They had dinner and then went to the living room to talk and have dessert, and in the living room there was a huge window facing the front lawn of the house that you could see out into the street from. It was beginning to get somewhat dark, and my mum walked over to the window to try to see the sun setting, but as she was looking out, something caught her eye. There was a car parked across the street with the engine turned off and what appeared to be two people in the front seats. My mum's friend asked her what was up, when she also saw the car across the street. Her face went pale and she pulled my mum away from the window, asking her if she had talked to any locals or been around the rest of the neighbourhood. My mum told her that before going to their house, they had stopped at a local pub to have lunch and tried to ask a local for directions. My dad must have overheard their conversation, because he chimed in then and said that he had actually asked some of the patrons at the pub if the Guinness in Belfast was as good as the Guinness in Dublin. My parents' friend then looked at the both of them with a horrified look and explained that this neighbourhood in particular was controlled by the Ulster Defence Association, a Protestant paramilitary group that was notoriously anti-Catholic. It turned out that my dad and his big mouth had inadvertently alerted the residents of this unapologetically Protestant neighbourhood that he was Catholic due to his Southern Irish accent. My dad then looked out the window, and as he put it, his stomach dropped and his blood ran cold. The street lights had turned on by that point, and were shining upon the car and the two figures. My dad then claims he saw that the two figures in the car now had balaclavas on. As soon as he let my mum and their friend know, their friend immediately sprang into action and quickly led them to the back door. She drove both my parents back to the train station, where they bought a ticket to go back to Dublin. They thanked their friend and got on the train, and to this day, my parents still have the utmost respect for that friend of theirs. This occurred to me and my then girlfriend in the summer of 2004, and I need to provide a bit of context first. My hometown was decimated by flooding from Hurricane Floyd in 1999, and part of the response and recovery efforts involved FEMA setting up RVs as temporary housing for those whose homes were either destroyed or heavily damaged. These RVs were set up in a previously vacant field outside of town, and the park was dismantled by 2001 or so they put up fencing around the perimeter and trenched over the other streets into it to keep people out. But they forgot one entrance, or they'd left it purposely open for emergency vehicles to have access. Some friends of mine had found this entrance, and we'd frequently used the area as our playground. We would go back there to set off fireworks, turn the streets into a racecourse, and to have sex with our girlfriends. Now to set the stage of how this place looked. There were 3 streets running to the east-west, a street that went around the other streets in an oval fashion, and the grass was very overgrown, being about 4 feet high. The south and north side of the area was wooded, and the east had large dirt berms that were about 20 feet high, that had been placed there when the site was upgraded in '99. They normally provided a climbing challenge for our SUVs. On this particular day, my girlfriend and I were parked on one of the east-west streets amongst the tall grass to remain hidden, and we got undressed to have sex in the back seat of my car. As we began, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, so I turned to look, and there was a man coming over the 20-foot-high dirt berm. He was wearing denim overalls, and in his left hand he had a full-size axe. A wave of fear washed over me, and I yelled out, "Oh my God," and my girlfriend popped up to look out through the back windshield and let out a scream and a, "What are we going to do?" I frantically started looking for the car keys, but there was a pile of clothes on the floor, so I couldn't find them. I looked out the back, and he was getting closer. I could see his face now. It was emotionless, and he had a blank stare. I started grabbing clothes and shaking them to hopefully find the keys, when they came loose and fell to the floor. I grabbed them and immediately jumped into the driver's seat, still completely naked. I started the car, and from the back seat my still naked girlfriend screamed. I started the car, and from the back seat my still naked girlfriend screamed, "Go!" I looked in the rearview mirror as I was putting the car into drive, and he was now within 50 to 60 feet of the car with the same blank look, but staring at the car with the axe still in hand. I didn't even fasten my seatbelt, and was still fully nude as I floored the gas, kicking up rocks everywhere as the tires spun, and I sped away from this man. We got out of the abandoned FEMA park as quickly as I could drive the car without crashing it. My girlfriend was hysterical the whole time until we got back to the main road and were safe, where we stopped about a mile up the road on the side to put our clothes back on and de-stress. I don't know where this man had come from, as there are no houses within a mile or so of the old FEMA site, but he'd seemingly come out of nowhere. I also didn't see any other cars at the site, as I had done a lap around the park before we'd chosen our spot. I'm not sure what his intentions were, as he'd never said anything to us, and I know he'd seen us panicking in the car. But whatever his intentions were, I'm positive they weren't good. The look on his face and the axe in his hand made that abundantly clear. I went back with a few friends a few days later, and found no place where this guy could have been lurking, and there were no signs anyone had been camping there. To this day, it's one of the scariest events I've ever been through. I, a female and 16 years old at the time, was hanging out at my friend Ava's place, who was also 16, and another girl named Abigail, who was 14. We decided it would be a great idea to sneak out of the apartment in the middle of the night. And for some background, it was a suburban Eastern European neighbourhood, so the idea wasn't a good one considering that fact. By around 1:15 a.m, Ava and I were the first out, and the plan was to walk straight to the town's river, which should be pretty straightforward, right? However, as we walked along, to my horror, I saw in front of us a tall, middle-aged man shouting the name Andrew whilst simultaneously holding a pocket knife. I knew straight away that this was bad news. So terrified, I whispered to my friend that we needed to get away ASAP, and I couldn't explain right then. We were just to go back the way we came. Ava, being almost blind, she couldn't see much in the dark, so definitely didn't see the man, started running backwards like crazy. She stepped on a branch in the process though, and it made the loudest freaking sound one could ever make in such a situation. The man turned around then and looked me straight in the eyes, so I just started running too. We got back to the apartment safe and sound, and a couple of drinks later, my other friend Abigail decided she wanted to sneak out too. Me, being the rebellious teen that I was though, followed her without a second thought, and by this time it was about 3 a.m. So we were hanging out in the local park, smoking and talking about boys, when suddenly, lo and behold, at the park's entrance, there was the man from before. I told Abigail that this wasn't good and we needed to go right away. So we quietly left the park, and thankfully he didn't start chasing us. What was worse, though, is he got into a white van, and it was obvious he was following us from a distance in it. However, that wasn't the problem, as we were close to Ava's house, right? Or so I thought. That is until Abigail turned to me and whispered, "Don't let it show, but I think we're lost." And then it hit me. We really were. We started turning at random corners and desperately looking for her house. But just then we ran into Ava's dad, who had woken up to the horror of 2 missing kids. Obviously we all got a pretty bad telling off that night, and were sent to bed immediately. And looking back on it, as much as I hated her dad for it, I can quite honestly say now that someone was definitely looking out for us back then. Don't play with your chances like this. I can't stress this enough. There are a lot of sick people out there, especially in sketchy neighbourhoods in the middle of the night. And even to this day, I wonder what could have been if we hadn't found the house in time. A couple of years ago, I was coming home from a gig in Cambridge, England, and I didn't have enough fuel to get home. So of course I pulled into a petrol station to get some. I pulled up, put the pump into the car and began pressing it to fill up. But I was getting no response from it, and the attendant was nowhere to be seen from the other side of the window. It was 2 a.m. at this point, so the shop wasn't open. You have to pay through the kiosk in the window. So I was standing there like a lemon, and nothing was happening. So I approached the night window and banged on it, but still nothing. Nobody home. Just then I heard a shuffle behind me, and a deranged, breathy giggle. As I spun around, there he was, the strangest, most peculiar-looking man I've ever seen. He was wide-eyed, scruffy and hooded, and was on all fours in a crawl position, with his head cocked up, glaring at me, and a menacing, snarling, saliva-laced grin. I backed away slowly, assessing the situation. Is he just a nutter that had escaped from an asylum? Or is he a sinister asshole that just gets a thrill out of scaring people? As I backed away, he slowly moved sideways whilst giggling and wheezing at the same time, dribble all around his mouth and chin. Our glares were locked on each other, and I was preparing to run and boot him in the chops. But just then the shop attendant appeared from hiding under the counter and put a sign against the window saying, "Police have been called." This was enough to get the lunatic's attention, and he slowly arose to a hunched standing position and just stared, still smiling at the window and the makeshift sign. This gave me enough time to run and jump into my motor and lock all doors, but still stick around, as I wouldn't forgive myself if the shop guy got hurt, even though the nut job was locked out. But you never know. The freak didn't move a muscle for what seemed like 3 minutes or so. But then sirens in the distance snapped him out of it, and he lifted his head to shout and swear towards the sky. Then he ran off into the trees behind the petrol station. By this point I'd had enough and booked it home. The adrenaline lasted for hours, but I managed to drive okay and all was fine. He was just a man in a hoodie acting like a loon who was probably high on something. But nevertheless, it was extremely creepy. So I'm a dog walker for a small but busy company, and I have one client in a somewhat nicer neighbourhood that I go to twice a week in the mornings. Like most people who use dog walkers, they use a lockbox, and they decided to keep theirs behind a vase next to their apartment door. It was already a busy Monday for me, and I was in a bit of a rush. I was hoping to get Mia, their Bernedoodle puppy, by 9:45 a.m, so I could stay on track for the day. And after finding a parking spot, which is usually hell, I made my way up the apartment to their door, wrapped my hand around the vase, and went to grab the lockbox, but there was nothing. I wasn't alarmed at first, as sometimes owners forget to put out lockboxes. It's not super common, but it does happen. So I looked around for a bit more, but I had no luck. So I texted the owner, who I'll call Kay for this story. And usually when I text her I get no response, as she's always so busy. But I texted her anyway, asking her where the lockbox could possibly be, as it wasn't in its usual spot. About 5 minutes passed with no response, and I was honestly getting a bit irritated. I'd already had a busy day driving all around the city, and now I was going to be running behind. I started knocking as there was a chance her husband would be home, so I knocked about 3 separate times, until I then heard some shuffling upstairs. Someone was home. It took a bit of time, but I heard someone making their way down the stairs. It was taking time, but someone was definitely coming down. The door opened and it wasn't Kay, or her husband. It was a man, and he stood in front of me. He was only wearing a white towel that was barely hanging off his hips, and he was holding Mia in his arms. He looked extremely caught off guard, and of course I was confused and also caught off guard, but I wasn't quite horrified. Maybe they were having someone staying with them, or maybe someone was having an affair and that's why the lockbox was absent. "Hey," I said, "I'm here to take Mia for a walk." He let her run out into the hallway and handed the leash and collar over to me, which are always on the staircase railing. I asked him to please give me the lockbox to keep outside, as I would need to get back inside. So he gave it to me, then we headed out for our walk. I was a bit flabbergasted. Did I just walk in on an affair? Was he a visitor? It wasn't too out of the ordinary, as sometimes clients forget to mention they have guests. But then during our walk I received a message from my manager. "Do you have Mia?" it read. Then she called. I picked up and let her know that yes, I did have Mia, and we were on our walk. She said she'd gotten a weird message from Kay, her owner, saying that a man had come by earlier who'd said he was the new dog walker and needed their lockbox code. But we'd never set up a new walker. Ever. I then let her know about the man who had answered the door in a towel when I'd arrived at the apartment, and how the lockbox was nowhere to be seen. I told her I wasn't sure if I had walked in on something or if he was a guest, but he was neither. He wasn't supposed to be there at all. The police were called immediately, and I was told not to go back into the home. I called Kay's husband, as he was on his way back over, and Kay was en route from work. Kay's husband told me he felt so stupid for telling the man the code and believing him, but that he was in a rush out the door and didn't assume anything bad was going to happen. I continued walking down the street, which was quite a busy major one, when I spotted a familiar man across the street. He ran across towards me and was holding a beer in his hand. "Hi, doggy," he said. It was the man from inside the apartment. Then he ran back to where he was. I immediately turned the other direction into one of the side streets and called Kay's husband. He was nearing the neighbourhood and told me he'd just seen the man matching the description. Once Kay and her husband had arrived, we went upstairs to scope out the apartment, expecting some items to be missing. But nothing. Everything was perfectly in its place, untouched. and the only thing different was some dirty water in the shower that had been used. I was so happy no one was hurt, including Mia, and I was happy I wasn't hurt too. But how did he know they had a dog walker? One day, my best friend and I were taking a shortcut to her house. It went past a few houses and through a small area of woods, crossing a 2-foot wide creek. And this particular day, I was wearing one of those jackets that had earbuds as the strings, which was a must-have item as a 5th grader in 2010 to 11. As we passed one of the houses, though, a couple of big dogs came running out of it, jumping on us and obviously just wanting to play or be petted. The owner of the house then came out, and I noticed right away that he was acting really fidgety and nervous, saying stuff about the dogs like, "Oh, it's okay, they're nice, don't worry." We made small talk with him about the dogs for a few minutes, then turned around to leave. But about a minute or so later, we arrived at the small creek, when I noticed that one of the rubber earbuds that was on my jacket was gone. I insisted on going back to look for it then, and the guy came back out again and offered to help us look for it. He asked what the material was made of, and I said it was made of rubber. We made small talk again, I think about the jacket and how cool it was. He said then that he was going to be right back with his metal detector, and he walked away towards his shed. I said to my friend, "Why does he need a metal detector? The earbud's made of rubber." The next thing you know, he was coming back with, and I shit you not, a rifle, and was literally running towards us. Now when I tell you we ran, and when we got to safety past the creek near her house, I was telling her we needed to call 911 right away. But she insisted we didn't, because her parents would be mad at her. I explained to her with urgency though why it was important we called the cops. But she refused and I couldn't force her. I didn't call because I didn't want to do it alone. Plus it would have been my first time calling them. I can't remember when or if I told my parents that night what happened. But when I did tell them, they gaslit me and said I was crazy and overreacting, and that I didn't really see what I'd described. I still think about this damn near every day, and it really haunts me. The second time was again when I was in 5th grade, and it took place after the first story, but I'm not sure how long after. The friend from the previous story lived near a cemetery, which was about a 5-minute walk from her house. It was a big cemetery, and we liked to walk around it a lot. Plus behind it was a shortcut through the woods to a big park, which was coincidentally right next to our school. This day we were also with another good friend of ours, and were just walking around the cemetery, when all of a sudden, a blue truck pulled up next to us in the row next to where we were walking, which was about 10 feet away or so. I could see 2 guys were in it, literally just staring at us, and I again got that weird feeling that I'd gotten with the first guy. It's hard to explain, but right before the shortcut in the woods is a fence with a cutout that leads to a field of grass and a hill next to it that leads into the neighbourhood of where my other friend lived. The hill, though, was really just a bunch of dead grass, weeds, sticks, and cattails, etc., and I told my friends that I had a bad feeling about these guys, that they were staring at us and quite literally slowly following us with the truck. We booked it to that grass field and through that hill, and I had all sorts of cuts and gashes from all the crap that we were having to run through. When we got to the top of the hill, we turned around and the truck was parked at the top of the hill on the other side, with both men outside of it holding rifles. I truly believe they were coming after us, and they were visibly mad that we'd gotten away from them. I knew they were after us because they'd had to have driven through the cutout in the fence, amongst the gut feelings I had and just the entire situation. We ran to my friend's house, found her parents, who truly didn't seem too worried, and they drove my other friend and me home. I don't even remember if I told my parents about it this time, as they gaslit me the last time. I just can't shake the fact that this really happened. I also can't believe how lightly my parents took the situation. I'm honestly traumatized about what happened, and I think about it a lot. I just needed to tell some people what had happened, but I have trouble getting my thoughts into words. This happened when I was 17, and my now fiancé and I lived in the mountains, and used to smoke up green often, and this day we decided to go up to our favourite parkway to smoke. The parkway was a long road up a mountain, with many pull-offs to look either at more mountains or down at the city, but we went to our favourite pull-off, which was about 25 minutes up the mountain. We smoked and hung out for a while, but unfortunately hadn't realised how fast it was getting dark, and how the cold front was moving in. At that moment in time, I felt confident that I was sober enough to be able to drive without a problem, so we started heading on our way down. However, I found out very quickly that I was feeling overconfident, and was in fact too high for this drive. So I asked my fiancé if I could stop at a pull-off and sober up a bit, which of course he was perfectly fine with. I pulled off at the next opportunity, and see that a car was already parked there. We parked about 15 feet away from it, and what happened next went so quickly I couldn't even get a full breath in. My fiancé suddenly said, "What are they doing?" So I looked over to the parked car, and a guy inside looked like he was on top of someone in the passenger seat. My fiancé said there was a girl in there that I hadn't seen. But what was really weird is that it honestly looked like he was choking the girl, but we couldn't tell. I mean no judgment, maybe it was something they were into, but our high minds wanted nothing to do with it. I told him I would start driving, but it was going to be slow, so just to bear with me. But again, unfortunately, life always has other plans. The pull-off we went into had one directly across the other side of the road, where we didn't see a black truck sitting there. Well, right when I was about to pull out, the truck was weirdly already waiting to pull out too, with his headlights off. It was completely dark at this point, and right when I pulled out onto the road, he turned his lights on and was immediately on my bumper. At this point I was high as hell, freaking out trying to just get down this mountain, but this truck was following me all the way down, not even backing off a little bit. I got onto the highway eventually, and this truck pulled in front of us, and was trying to get us to slow down by flickering his turn signals back and forth to get me to pull over. It went on for about 2 minutes, before my fiancé told me to slow down to 10 miles an hour, which is dangerous on a road like that, but he had his reasons why he thought it was a good idea. I just don't remember what they were, but once I did slow down, the truck quickly sped away. None of it made sense, and we think now there's a chance people could have been messing with us, and I have no idea if us seeing a guy choking someone and then being followed were related, but it was weird. I definitely don't smoke and drive anymore. So I'm a non-conventional looking 50-something, motor-riding chick, and after a 1.5 years of lockdown, I finally got vaxxed and decided to go back to the gym. It was the beginning of summer, and I was nailing a perfect every other day schedule, hitting at the same time each morning. It was awesome, as I'd leave feeling high as a kite on endorphins. Since I'd ride my motor to the gym, I'd get on that puppy and fly home or run errands, and life was good. At this gym, the motor parking often had a truck parked in the spot, so I'd hit up the front desk to ask about it, and they said it was the maintenance guy and to just park near the bike rack. It'll be fine, they said, so I did. Mind you, it was next to the bike rack, not in front of it, not blocking it, but literally next to it. Now I would arrive almost the same time every day, and no bikes would be in the rack. I would leave almost the same time every day too, with one bike then being there, the same one every day. The rack could accommodate perhaps 6 bikes, but this bike owner kept parking it at the end nearest my motor. It would be so near to my motor that at times I would have to squeeze between the bike and my back tyre. I really didn't care though. I mean, I'm leaving the gym high and happy, with music in my ears, and about to ride my motorcycle. It barely registered that this bike owner kept doing this for weeks. It was just a split second of WTF, then it was forgotten. I come out of the gym this one day though, and noticed the bike was now fully blocking me, squeezing between it and my motor. They'd had to have known that for me to gain access, I would have to move their back tyre, which is exactly what I did. And as I was about to mount my ride, I saw a note on my seat that read, "You're a moron for parking your motorcycle here." Now you might think that that pissed me off, but it didn't. It was actually kind of humorous. I wrote on the note in reply that I had permission to park there from the gym, and there was plenty of room at the bike rack for his bike, and to "Get a grip, Karen, you need to smile more, you'll be more positive." I then put it on his bike and quite literally promptly forgot about it, as it was inconsequential to life and liberty. The next time I went to the gym, I had a great workout and all was righteous. But as I was leaving, an old guy stopped me and said, "Why did you touch my bike?" I looked and saw an old man and realised that this must be the person who'd been on a campaign to engage me in my motor parking. I said, "Oh, you're the guy who left the note." He said he hadn't left a note, and why did I touch his bike? I told him he'd been blocking access to my motor for weeks, which he denied, then went on to ask why I'd damaged his bike. "I didn't damage your bike. Look, if you'll be honest, I'm willing to have a conversation with you, but if you're going to lie, I'm going to walk away." "Is that a threat?" he asked. I stopped for a second because it was such a ludicrous turn. Then I said sarcastically, "Yeah, that's a threat." But this made him lose it, and he started yelling that I'd threatened him and damaged his bike, and he was going into the club to call the cops, which he proceeded to do. I was standing outside, kind of in a bit of shock, as I have some PTSD, and one of the things I must do at all costs, is to not create any new trauma or drama in my life. So my flight mechanism was strong at this moment. I figured to perhaps de-escalate his freak-out, I went in and tried to ask him why this wasn't a conversation. But he just started yelling, "Get back! You threatened me and damaged my bike." Now the gym is wide open at the desk, meaning anyone in the gym has a front row seat to him yelling and carrying on. I was trying to reason with him, and he was just yelling, "Get back," whilst on the gym's desk phone to the cops. The cool chick behind the counter looked at me and said that perhaps I should just wait outside. So I headed back out, and now I was tripping, because this had become something. After a minute or so, I decided I needed to get out of there, as the whole PTSD thing was being triggered big time, and I just needed to leave. So I went into the club with my ID in hand, and told the guy to take a picture of it, as I was going to go. Of course he started in again on the "Get back, you threatened me, you damaged my bike" spiel, and the cool chick behind the counter took my ID and copied it, then handed him the copy and I was gone. After an hour or so, I got home and called the gym to talk to the manager. She told me that this guy had been coming to the gym for 15 years, and while he's always been a decent dude, he is getting on in age at 80, and might be declining a little. I said I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at this point, since he'd pretty much announced his assassination of my character to the whole gym, of which I cross paths with every morning. Also him having friends after a 15-year membership. I felt like I wouldn't be comfortable going back to that gym, ever. So the really nice manager cancelled my membership on the spot, and she was really understanding. I was grateful for her compassion. And for the record, yeah, they can cancel your membership on the spot. If they tell you different, it's BS. I got a call from a cop after a while, and was able to tell my side of the story. The cop said that no crime had been committed, and that the guy was a little unhinged, that nothing came of it and a report wasn't taken. They hadn't written down a single detail, and I thought that was the end of it. But you guessed it. It wasn't even close to being over. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail, saying that I had a temporary restraining order placed against me, and to show up at a court on this date. Now you have to know something about me at this point. I'm a squeaky clean human with nothing but getting a speeding ticket. I avoid cops and the system like the plague, and I want nothing to do with the legal world, having successfully avoided it my whole life, up until this point. I was dealing with the aftermath of this ridiculousness. Losing membership at a gym I really liked sucked, but I was getting over it and past it. Life was okay-ish. But this, now I was pissed. PTSD flare-ups, getting triggered, not sleeping, not eating, and my stupid mind going crazy. So I went on to Reddit to look up lawyer help, because I had no idea what to do. I got some advice, which was to just go to the court date, tell your side of the story, don't get emotional, stay professional, and all should be okay. So I attended the court date and figured it was going to be like an episode of Judge Judy, as that's really the only court thing I've ever seen in my life. I should mention too, though, at this point, that I have no idea what this guy looks like. Our interaction couldn't have been more than a minute in total, and to be honest, I'd never really looked at the guy. I mean, I had a cursory glance, but never focused on him at all, so I had no idea at the court if he was there or not. When my case got called, his lawyer was on Zoom and asking for a continuance because I hadn't been served papers, whatever that means. So we got a new date 3 weeks later away, and I got my paperwork. I took it home and looked into it, and holy hell, that SOB had written out a story of grand proportions. It read like a cheap dime store novel of highly fictional content. I waved my hands and arms in a menacing manner and said, yes, I did it. I damaged your bike, and I'm going to kick your effing ass. You're just an old man, and I will kick your effing ass. What? I was completely shocked for days after reading that. I mean, how in the actual hell does a person defend themselves against such outrageous accusations? I don't fight, and I've never been in a fight in my life as I hate violence. I'm an empath, a pacifist, and just this little woman. I went back on Reddit and hit up legal advice again. Got the same advice to go into court, just be honest, calm, cool, collected, tell the story, and I should be golden. I showed up at the next court date and was ready. I got my story tight and ready to spank this POS with some truth. But again, I still didn't know what he looked like, so I didn't even know if he was there. They called my name and just his lawyer was there, again asking for a continuance. I actually blurted out no, and the judge was a bit taken aback. I said, "Look, this has been really stressful. I need this to be over. I can't sleep, I'm barely eating, and none of what he said is true. Why can't we deal with this today?" I found out right then that I was supposed to write up my side and submit it to the court. But nowhere did I see it say this, and my legal help never told me I needed to do that either. So now we have another court date, an entire month away. I should also mention that the judge was this old guy who was the biggest asshole. He was just so condescending and rude, and insulted me when I asked him about once I'd filled out the paperwork, where did I bring it? He just gave me a 2-minute condescending answer that didn't tell me anything, and it took 3 times of me asking for him to finally tell me the clerk down the hall outside the courtroom. So far this had been a living nightmare, and all over a non-event. Nothing happened, except an old guy freaked out and made up a story to validate his freak-out, and I was being dragged along for the ride. At this point I conceded that I was out of my league, and I needed a lawyer. I really didn't have money for one, and would have to borrow it. So I found a lawyer, and since I had never spoken to one before, I had no idea if he was good or bad. All I did know was he seemed cool. So for the next few weeks we had some appointments, and he got the cool chick behind the desk to come to court as my witness to tell her side. Which, by the way, the old guy had made up a whole story about how I'd chased him into the gym and threatened him in there, until a gym employee came to his rescue. Which was fully contradicted by the woman employee behind the counter who witnessed the entire thing. I've got this in the bag. I met with my lawyer the day before to go over things, and he said that the guy's lawyer was willing to do this thing called a peaceful no contact, which means no condescending judge, no trying to prove my side of the story, and that it's over and I get to sleep tonight. I really wanted my legal bills to be paid by him, since he'd fabricated an entire story and brought it to the legal system. But what I wanted and needed more was for this to be over. So I pulled the trigger and agreed to the deal. Except the old guy's lawyer was crafty and didn't answer that evening, so we had to show up in court the next day and proceed as if the offer was not on the table. Now, I'm very strongly vaxxed and masked up, and I have a medical background and understand contagions. So I didn't want to go to court, as no one wore masks. Not the judge, not the bailiff, and not anyone there for their court date. But I went. His lawyer blackmailed me. If I didn't pay $200 for his damaged bike and agree to the peaceful no contact, with prejudice on his part, she would postpone this day's hearing, stating he'd recently had hip surgery and wasn't up to the hearing, even though he was in court that day. Then she would dismiss the temporary restraining order and sue me for elder abuse. I had been essentially rammed up the ass. I couldn't afford to defend myself against elder abuse, even if I could no doubt easily win. But I had no money to even consider the idea, so I had to take the deal. So to recap, the beginning to my awesome summer turns into a 3-month debacle, all because an 80-year-old guy who has some cognitive issues and decides that he doesn't like my motorcycle near the bike rack makes up a fake story, takes it to court, and his lawyer outlawyers my lawyer, and I'm out $2,000 that I had to borrow. I lost membership to a gym I enjoyed. I lost an entire summer having to deal with a triggered PTSD scenario. And now that I am a few months away from it, I have become more of a recluse and haven't rejoined another gym, or re-engaged in society for that matter. I never once looked at him, so can still say to this day that I have no idea what this POS looks like. I've done this because as my PTSD flares, I don't want to be seeing his face. So in 2018, I was pregnant with my second child, and my partner, 1-year-old son and myself had to go to the laundromat to dry our clothes. It was around 10 p.m, and where we were parked was right in front of a footpath. My partner ran in to put the laundry in the dryer, and while I was waiting for them to come back, I saw a man walk by with his dog. As soon as I saw him though, I had a really bad feeling. I just knew something was coming and couldn't understand why. The path in front of the car basically led to a brick wall because it was a little shopping centre, and you can just follow the path to go to another street. But I watched this man stop where the path turned into a corner, and he just waited there for about 2 minutes. Then he started walking back in the direction he came from, which was past the car. At this point, my partner was coming out of the laundromat, and as soon as this man saw him, a 6-foot Samoan man I might add, this guy started grabbing his chest and asking my partner to support him. It was like he was seizing up. My partner tried his best to help him, but I was very wary because this guy had a massive German Shepherd that I wasn't sure he was going to command it to attack. This went on for about 5 minutes. I actually think he was trying to pickpocket my partner, and I had no idea what to do because I was heavily pregnant and had a 1-year-old sleeping in the car with me. I finally jumped out and said then, maybe I should call an ambulance. But as soon as I said that, this man jumped straight up and said, "Oh, no, that's okay." Then he simply just walked away. This is the only time I've ever had a bad feeling like that, and it was 100% correct. So I really need to tell this story for my own mental sake, so here it is. It happened about 2 years ago while I was a little bit more of a naive young adult than I am now. So I've basically been repressing this for 2 years, and a lot is coming back to me as I type this out. Sometime after I graduated high school, I had decided to move out of my parents' house and eventually found a room for rent locally in my small town. It was a small house and a small room, but being young, I had the ability to survive in these conditions with ramen and a Slim Jim handy whilst I worked as a manager at my local pizza place to pay my luckily measly rent. My roommate was a few years older than me, and I knew him through Facebook. We were pretty much completely different, being that he was pretty sketchy, and when we'd hang out our clothes to dry, he would listen to hip-hop music and then make racially charged jokes in my presence. I have nothing against hip-hop, but this guy just boggled my mind. He was definitely a character, and I like a good character in somebody. Little did I know. Generally, living together wasn't so bad, but the one thing we had in common was that we liked to have our quiet and be alone, which is how I spent most of my time when I lived there. Besides, this guy not being someone I wanted to associate myself with, I still know him and interact with him now, because I have to. I always figured he must have been an ex-addict or something like that. He seemed to be doing well, and it stayed peaceful for about 4 months, and he and I would hang around the living area once in a while and do our thing. Talk, smoke pot, whatever. And this is important for later. Now, I'm a creative type, so one night I decided to take a particular man-made psychedelic and enjoy the rest of my night in my room with all sorts of things to do, and hope to use the experience to give me something to think about. I've done it before, and when I do, it's not much. So I dosed once and went on with my night. But sometime in the midst of my trip, I heard one of my roommate's friends open the front door and come in, and they were talking. At this point, I could kind of tell that something was wrong, because the lady's voice I had heard was definitely not normal or stable at all. She was very obviously hopped up on something, but she left after a short time, which arises more suspicion from me, putting all this together in a separate room. I wasn't fully onto the situation, but there was the seed of worry in my mind, especially now that my trip had begun to start kicking in. For context, as soon as I open my bedroom door, I basically have direct line of sight into my roommate's living area. So I opened the door and my eyes fell directly upon my roommate, who was laid back on his couch burning on his pipe that was meant for his certain other CIA-distributed 80s buzz drug, which you can probably connect the dots about. This is where I cued Curb Your Enthusiasm in my head. He wanted to be my friend, and I would say I was his friend, until this moment. He immediately realized this and got up, walking towards me with his crack pipe in hand. He stood in front of me and told me about how he didn't want me to know about this, and how he only does it every so often. My mind was blown, really, as I was pretty whacked myself. I tried to appeal to him by being kind and trying to calm him down and make him feel less guilty, to which I told him how I was currently tripping, but this is where the ratty look washed across his face, and he looked me in the eyes and started kind of nudging me back into my room with him. He said, "Man, you gotta get some of this." That was when I started to try to defuse the situation entirely, despite tripping hard. I was still in my right mind enough to start pushing him out of my room, insisting that I didn't want to join in on this habit. Eventually he stopped and went back to doing it on the couch again. I think he felt really bad and wanted me to understand that he wasn't a bad person and that he wanted me to hang out with him in the living area. So I obliged because I didn't want him to feel rejected, as who knows what he could be thinking. I went out there and he asked me to roll a joint for him because he couldn't do it himself at that moment. And whilst I was trying to do this for him, he continued to use in front of me. I was freaking out now, as I don't even like to drink alcohol, party, or anything like that. Yet here I was on a psychedelic rolling a joint, whilst my strung-out roommate used hard drugs 5 feet away from me. My hands were shaking the whole time, and I couldn't really roll properly. Eventually the situation diffused enough to where I went back into my room, and my roommate was still hopped up on the jazz. He continued with what he was doing outside my room, whilst I was having the worst trip ever. the experience ruined by him and a good trip turned horribly wrong. Eventually I started to come down, and I was once again called out of my room by my roommate, who had his shirt off and was wielding an aluminium bat that he usually had leaning up against the door. I was gripping the doorknob, ready to slam the door in his face if he tried anything. The front door was open, and he started whispering to me about somebody right outside it. I was kind of done with his crap at this point, and was starting to sober up more. I walked right over to the front door and pointed out to him that the person he'd seen outside was just his bike he always parks right in front of the door. I went back into my room, gripped my keys in my hands as per the classic weapon preparation, and I laid down. I couldn't sleep though because of my roommate being all crazy and annoying outside my door, and I actually ended up listening to some music and discovering one of my favourite albums of all time. Luckily my roommate never tried to harm me that night, as I thought he was going to. But I don't know. He was just unpredictable, and I knew he felt bad about using, which meant he could have let his feelings take over. I got the hell out of there ASAP, and I ended up moving out of state from my small town to a city in Ohio. Then I later moved back to my hometown, and now work in retail, where I get regular customers monthly, one being my old roommate. The poor guy still wants to be friends, and he's not a bad person, but he knows he can't be doing that around others like that. I think he could get better, and if he does get better, I'll be happy for him. Addicts are people too, and I think we should all encourage them to make art. They can turn their sorrow into power, and if you're going to do drugs, only do psychedelics around people you trust and in a safe environment. So my boyfriend and I were having a conversation where we were talking about the one major creepy thing that we remember in detail to this very day. After hearing his story, I was sure he was going to look at me like I was crazy when I told him mine. His was your average ghost story, but mine was something I wish was a ghost story. It was 2012 and I was 16 years old, working at Worlds of Fun. It was my day off, so I decided to take my little brother to Worlds of Fun as we got to go in for free, as I was an employee. However, while driving on the highway, there was a car in front of me driving 10 miles an hour under the speed limit. So I moved a lane over with the goal to pass them, and when I was side by side with them, they started matching my speed. This went on for 10 minutes, and my exit was coming up. But every time I sped up or slowed down to get back over, they would match me, not letting me over. Frustrated, I looked over at the driver, and at first I only saw a bald old lady with a sheer floral scarf on her head. But then I looked down at her face, and the fear I felt I still remember to this day. It wasn't your average old lady, and I personally feel like it wasn't an old lady at all. Her face was covered in wrinkles, her eyes were black, narrow slits, and her nose was something like what you see on an evil witch in Hollywood films. You know, the long nose with warts. Her teeth were long and sharp, hugged by thin lips, and I remember the smile she gave me. She consistently looked at me, then back to the road, her hands aggressively shaking on the steering wheel. Since I was driving, I had to look at the road, but kept looking back at her, hoping I was seeing things. And each time I did look back, her smile was getting bigger and bigger. I looked at the road horrified, refusing to look back over, and asked my brother if he could look over at her, and if he saw it too. Then it would confirm I wasn't going crazy. "Step on the gas," he said, and the second I heard the panic and fear in his voice, I moved the car into 6th gear and cut over another lane and stepped on it. At the time I wasn't worried about if we were going to pass our exit, as I just needed to get away from her, from that thing. Since then I would ask my brother if he remembered that event, and at first he would mention every detail he'd seen of her, and everything matched what I'd seen. He would mention the fear he felt, and as the years started passing, he would slowly forget. Today he doesn't remember it at all. But for me, though, the image is burned into my brain. I haven't told this story a lot, and I've tried looking up masks that would slightly resemble what we saw, but I couldn't find anything remotely like it anywhere. Even then I knew it wasn't a mask. As being an ex-cosmetologist, I've delved a bit into FX that could pull off what I saw. The smile every time I looked back at her that grew bigger and bigger, almost to devour us. So everyone knows what doing laundry is like. Monotonous work while your brain tries to waste away the minutes it takes for the machine to finish its cycle, occasionally having stiff conversations in passing with strangers. And this night was no different, at first. As I pulled my laundry out of the dryer and began to fold it on a little table, I heard a voice over the lull of my headphones. "Excuse me, are you using this?" The voice came from a man in his late 40s, early 50s, and he was wearing glasses that reminded me of my grandfather. He was wearing a stained disposable face mask that hung under his nose and just above his mouth, and I could see the start of a dirty blonde mustache poking out. He was gesturing to an empty cart next to the table. I simply said, "No, I'm good. I have one already." And he took it and began loading his laundry and folding it on the table adjacent from mine. Now started the usual routine questions that all lonely older men seem to ask. "What's your name?" "Sarah." "Oh, that's beautiful. So how old are you?" 22. "Do you live around here?" "Not really. The town over." Which was a lie. "Did you go to college? What did you study?" "Yes, culinary arts management." "Oh, so you like to cook?" "Yes." I tried to keep the conversation short, but light-hearted, as it continued with some short remarks about the wonders of doing laundry, when he asked the dreaded questions. "Where do you work? Do you live by yourself?" I hesitated on the questions momentarily, trying to keep my privacy intact without provocation. "Oh, you wouldn't know it," I replied. "It's a small mom-and-pop restaurant. And no." Which was another lie. He stopped folding his laundry as I just started to load mine into my hamper. Then he walked over to my table and leaned against the washer so that he was in my eyesight, his eyes squinting slightly as he pulled his mask under his chin, uncovering his face. He then awkwardly called out, "So do you want to go to the movies with me sometime, cutie?" My eyebrows knitted together softly as a wave of different emotions flooded my brain. Confusion, as to why he'd even ask, as I didn't even know his name. Embarrassment, as he was easily my father's age, and I'm not into that. Shock, because this man doesn't even know what my face looks like. And anxiety, because I have to reject him. I was so thankful for my mask, because I'm sure my expression was not one he would have liked to see. So I softly shook my head and he copied my actions in tandem. I fumbled out a soft, "No, I'm sorry, I have a boyfriend." I studied his face as I watched his brain process my response, and he knitted his eyebrows together and curled his lip. I could see nicotine stains on his teeth. Then he replied in an eerily soft tone, like how you would calm a fussy baby. "Oh, no? You don't want to go to the movies? You have a boyfriend? Okay." He nodded his head with his last word, and his eyes widened slightly as they fixated on mine. His voice then grew suddenly cold, and he said, "It's okay, you don't have to lie to me." And it's okay, I thought, you don't have to lie to me, enunciating the don'ts with tinges of anger. Annoyance filled me at his accusation. "I'm not lying. We've been together for 1.5 years, and I love him." His eyes softened as he just now realized the other 2 people in the laundromat were there. Then he slinked away, returning to his laundry, long abandoned. I looked at him as I poured my hamper into my arms and uttered a small, "Have a nice day," and I haven't been back to that specific laundromat since, and I don't do laundry alone anymore. My friend, a 17-year-old female, and I, also a 17-year-old, went for our usual late-night slushy run. We usually alternate who drives and who pays, so it's fair, and on this night it was my turn to drive. After we got our slushies, my friend Ashley suggested we go to a park that she frequently visited and have a go on the swings. Now, because it was late at night, we'd purposely sat facing opposite ways on the swings so we could see our surroundings. I was facing the hill that went down into the neighbourhoods below the playground, and she was facing the street where I had parked. We talked about school and drama and everything that had been going on in our lives, when I noticed Ashley had stopped paying attention to what I was saying. She was staring at my car when she whispered, "Do you see that too, or am I crazy?" I felt my heart drop as I stared into the direction she was looking, which was directly at my car. "Ashley, stop it. This isn't fun. Shh. Look from where I'm sitting," she whispered. I slowly rose from my swing and crouched behind her, and as I'm taller than her, I could still see over her head, whilst also appearing as though I was sitting to whatever she thought she saw. I looked at my car as I whispered, "Ashley, I'm serious. This isn't..." And that's when I saw it. I held my breath to stay as still as I possibly could, as it was so easy to miss. Behind the driver's window of my car was a crouched figure, and at first I had figured it was the headrest of my seat, until I saw it move. It looked as if it was moving back and forth between my driver's side window and my backseat window to look at us. "You see it too, don't you?" Ashley whispered, neither of us taking our eyes off of it. Still convinced it was a trick of the eyes from the streetlight, I looked to the bottom of my car to see if I could see any feet underneath, when I noticed the shadows swallowed the bottom of my car. I glanced back to the top, and that's when I felt my racing heart drop. I could see the top of its head from over the top of my car, with the streetlight illuminating it. "We need to get out of here," I whispered to Ashley. "Where are we going to go? It's at your car," Ashley questioned, both of us trying to act naturally, in case if it hadn't noticed us looking at it. "I don't care, anywhere but here," I said as I gathered our things and started walking quickly along a path near the swing set. Ashley followed, asking what my plan was, as I called one of my male friends, and I had gone into full-blown survival mode. The path we were on winded around the playground and led back into the sidewalk, along the side of the street where my car was parked, and my male friend hadn't answered, so I scratched my plan to pretend he was my boyfriend on the phone, in an attempt to freak the figure out. Dumb, I know, but I didn't exactly have a lot to work with. I continued walking without having a plan, but prepared for a fight, and as we walked along the path, we realized that another car had pulled in behind mine. Nobody had gotten out, but the lights were still on, illuminating my car. As we rounded the playground and were able to look at my car whilst still being a good distance away, we saw that there was nobody there. I looked under my car, which was now visible from the other car's lights, and made sure no one was hiding underneath, before turning to Ashley and simply stating, "Get in the car now." We booked it to my car, and I pulled into the street before either of us buckled, and we didn't say anything until we made sure the car that was behind us wasn't following us. I still get nervous going to that park now, despite it being in a really good neighbourhood. I always tell a friend if I go there, and Ashley and I agree that the figure we saw was no trick of the eye, but we can't find an explanation as to how it vanished before our eyes. We have two theories as to how they got away without either of us seeing. One, they'd snuck around the side of the car as we were rounding the corner, meaning they'd hidden perfectly whilst moving at a quick enough speed that they could escape before we got there and booked it. Or, two, they got into the car that pulled up behind us before we'd even noticed it, which I personally think is much more likely. When we got to Ashley's house that night, We checked my car to make sure they hadn't marked it in any way for any sort of trafficking. And when we found nothing, I drove home and notified Ashley once I'd made it home safely. I can't help but feel like the car that had just suddenly appeared behind mine was somehow involved. Either a getaway car or someone who'd noticed someone staring at us using their lights to scare them away. To this day, we still have no solid explanation as to what happened that night. But Ashley and I frequently encounter creepy strangers when we're together. This was definitely the scariest encounter I've ever had. It was a rainy Friday in 2014, and I knew it was going to be a fun day. But that feeling quickly changed. As my friend Grace and I arrived at her house after school, we were both exhausted, and we wanted to try the new makeup that she'd bought. Grace knocked on the front door, and after 1 minute of waiting, a lady opened up. She was someone I'd never seen before, but immediately I knew something was wrong. She stared at me with a grin forming on her face, and something about her was very uneasy. She had a very dark aura around her, and I was hesitating to enter the house. Ever since I was young, I was very sensitive to the spiritual realm. I would see shadows, spirits, and hear voices, and worst of all, I'd dream about future incidents that actually happened, which was really scary. I looked at Grace and she nodded her head, reassuring me that it was going to be okay. So I entered the house, still feeling hesitant. Her aunt had turned around slowly and walked away, going into the kitchen, and we went upstairs to her bedroom. We had our fun with the makeup, and I was getting tired of it, so I went to the washroom to wash my face. As I'd finished up, I jumped in fear as I saw my friend's aunt standing at the door looking at me with dark, glaring eyes. When she'd noticed I'd seen her, she gave me a creepy grin, apologized, and slowly walked away. At that point I was scared and I knew something was wrong. I just wanted to leave immediately. It was now time to eat, so we went downstairs and did so. And as we were cleaning our plates, my friend's aunt was staring out of the dark window, drinking coffee. She suddenly then turned around and started to ask me questions about my family, especially about the females, such as my mum and aunts. I answered, feeling scared of course. Then I suddenly said I wanted to go home. She frowned, almost unnaturally, then said, "How will you get home?" Her voice was harsh. "I don't know, maybe I'll take the bus home," I responded, stuttering. She placed her cup of coffee in the sink and approached me. "What if someone follows you as you walk to the bus stop? Stabs your back and takes your bloody heart?" Tears of fear filled my eyes, and I looked at my friend, then back at her aunt, who was staring at me with wide eyes, smirking. "Why would you say something like that?" I began to say, but she cut me off. "If you walk home, someone might take your eyes and hide your body near the forest." I immediately looked at my friend with tears of fear running down my face. "Why? Why would she say that?" Then her aunt rolled her eyes and walked away. That night I didn't sleep, and my friend's dog kept barking. Then in the morning the dog was whimpering every time it looked at my friend's aunt. As we sat outside waiting for my dad to pick me up, she told me the whole truth about her aunt. She's a witch that practices black magic, and she recently moved to Canada from Africa, saying that how in her cult they would only pursue females to sacrifice to the spirits. I asked her why she hadn't been harmed, and she said because family doesn't harm each other. I left her house that day and never went back, ever again. "4 years ago, just after getting my degree, I decided it was time to leave my hometown and pursue my career. So I moved to a big city that was 9 hours away from my parents and most of my family. I had no friends there for months, and my starting salary was low because I'd come into the company as a trainee. I was very demotivated, and I missed my family a lot, so I decided to go visit the relatives I had that lived by the coast, which was 4 to 5 hours away by car. But I didn't have a car, and the buses were expensive. Then my cousin told me about this Facebook group for rides between my city and another that was close to their town, so I went there and found myself a ride with some university students who were just a few years younger than me. The day for the trip was here. I met them, and in total it was 5 of us in a wide sedan. A lady who was studying medicine who owned the car, her boyfriend, the driver, a sophomore girl who was friends with them, and a random young guy who'd found their ad on Facebook too, and we'll call him Mark. It was a Friday, and people from this whole region were infamous for drinking often. So, inspired by the warning my cousin gave me, I awkwardly asked them, "Sorry to ask, but none of you have drunk recently or planned to do it on our trip, right?" The driver assured me that he was fully sober, and that he wouldn't have any even if the passengers did. So after hearing that, his girlfriend and the other girl assured me that they wouldn't drink either, because their parents were very strict and wouldn't let them misbehave. Mark then giggled when hearing that and whispered to me, "Women in their town are infamous for drinking a lot and denying it." The trip commenced and we went around dozens of mountains, having a few conversations about university and work, but most of the trip was us listening to a popular singer from the 90s. After around 2.5 hours, the driver stopped the car at a gas station as he needed the bathroom, and Mark decided to go with him as he wanted to get something from the store. A few minutes later, I saw Mark and our driver coming back to the car, each holding a 6-pack of beer. Well, actually the driver was carrying 2 of those. I almost freaked out, but kept my composure and asked them if they were going to drink now. The driver said, "I won't until I'm done driving, but let the others and yourself take 1 or 2 if they want." Almost 2 hours later, we had left the mountains and arrived to flatland, with signs that said we were just 1 kilometre away from the city. Suddenly the car took a turn right, leaving the main road, and was heading towards the suburbs. The place looked desolate, and most of the houses seemed empty. I thought it was a bit weird, but didn't ask anything, because I assumed that maybe we were dropping the other girl off. They probably already knew where she lived. The dude then just parked the car on the yard of an abandoned house and said, "We're basically home. Are you guys down for some drinks?" Mark was totally down with it, but the girls kept saying stuff like, "I'm not sure, I don't usually drink. But okay, I'll make an exception, only because we had tough midterms." I refused and then said, "But how are we going to get to the city? You guys agreed to take me to the bus station." They said that it was already very close, and that in the worst case I could just walk there. I was more worried now because I'd planned to take the local bus at a certain time to then get to my cousin's town, which was still an hour away from there. They started drinking really quickly, and the girls got to the point where they were trying to pee doing a handstand against a wall. I was desperate to leave, but I didn't feel safe walking to the city because it was really dark out there, and this region had a bad reputation for crime. Outsiders were specifically more at risk. There was no phone signal there, so I had to wait for these guys and see what they could offer me. They'd finally decided it was time to go home, and I said it wasn't okay for any of them to drive anymore because they were all drunk, so I offered to drive. However, the driver said, "It's not up to me, the car belongs to my girlfriend." But his girlfriend refused, saying that she didn't even know me and her dad wouldn't be okay with a stranger driving her car. I said I understood that, but that we had to sort this out somehow. After a while, the driver finally got off from the driver's seat, so I assumed they were going to let me drive. I was sitting in the middle of the back seat, so I asked the guys next to me to let me out, when the sophomore girl, who was on my left, did so. But before I could stop her, she climbed into the driver's seat. "Friend, please let me drive. It's close and there's no one outside anymore," she said. "Okay, sure, but go slow, okay?" the car owner said. The previous driver got into the back seat with me and confined me back to the middle seat. I was getting really upset now and wanted to stop her, but I didn't know how to because everyone seemed okay with this. My panic got even worse, though, when this sophomore girl started asking them how to turn the car and how to operate it. "You don't know how to drive a car?" I asked in despair. "No, I don't. It's my first time trying. My parents haven't let me learn," she replied. "Get out then, please. I have a driver's license. I can get us home safely," I said. The car's owner then told me I couldn't decide over her car, and said that it would be okay, that there was almost no one out driving at this hour, and that they would help her friend learn how to drive. At that point I asked them to let me get out of the car, but they wouldn't. They swore it was a very short drive, that we would go slowly, and that it would be okay. But the girl really had no idea about how to drive. Unfortunately, too, it was an automatic transmission car. Had it been a manual, she probably wouldn't even been able to move it. But the car moved, in the ways you would expect for it to move with a driver who had never stepped on the pedals of a car. She would hit the brake and steer the wheel too hard, then drive in the middle of the road, freaking out whilst the others yelled at her what to do. I was begging them to let me out of the car, but they wouldn't listen. Fortunately, the streets were empty, but I couldn't help but fear that if a car was to come, we would for sure crash into it. Eventually we made it to the street where the bus station was, and as soon as they pointed that out, I asked them to just stop the car already and let me walk there, but they didn't. They forced me to be dropped in front of the station. I did make it there safely, but I don't even know how I could get out of this sort of situation if I was in it again. Years ago, I would babysit for a family friend regularly, and conveniently another close family friend, Jem, lived in a house that was joined on next door. So when the kids I looked after were in bed, we would sit in the front gardens, cups of coffee in hand, nattering over the hedge for an hour or two. We lived in a small rural village, the type where everyone knows one another, and if something was going down, the gossip spread like wildfire. The house where I used to babysit had a terrifying 14-stone Rottweiler called Barney, which to be honest I wouldn't get too close to, as he seemed unpredictable. He would always be stood on his back legs at the wrought iron gate that joined to the wall of the house, growling at anyone who got too close, and the house was on a housing estate, with these two particular houses being next to a footpath that led to the rest of the estate. On one particular evening the kids had gone to bed, and I was outside as usual talking to Jem over the hedge. It was slowly becoming darker, and she mentioned something about some weird guy being seen around the village that day, but that was about the extent of it. Then not long after that, a couple of the local teenagers walked past and stopped to chat with us. It was just small talk at first, but I asked what they were up to, and the older girl of the two said, "Mum wants us to go home before it's too dark, as there's this weird scruffy bloke hanging around." I told them they should probably hurry up in that case, and I side-eyed my friend as they said their goodbyes then left. Jem and I spoke about it briefly, as she told me that no one knew who he was, and he hadn't been seen around here before, but was apparently really creepy. As it got colder we said goodnight to each other, and I went inside to wait for the children's mum to come home from work. Shortly after, as I watched telly, Jem's dog next door started going berserk, and I could hear him through the walls. Then seconds later, Barney, who was outside, started aggressively barking and hammering himself against the wrought iron fence to the point that the walls on that side of the building shook. I had never heard him sound so worked up before. He was trying to get at something, and I sure as hell wasn't going outside to calm him down. Before I could even get up to look out the window, I heard the two boxer dogs from next door on the other side start going crazy too. By this point I was at the front window, wondering what was getting them all so agitated, as this seemed beyond the normal warning bark of dogs, and I saw the back of some tall, bedraggled guy, with long straggly hair, lurking down the footpath onto the estate. He wore what looked like a green anorak-style coat, which billowed behind him, and he passed a couple more doors up, where more dogs started aggressively yapping at him as he went by. Even more strangely was some of these dogs were indoors, and yet I could still hear them frantically barking. As he passed out of my view, I could tell roughly which direction he was going, as the cacophony of a dozen dogs barking could be heard flaring up along his route. It was crazy how all normal sound was drowned out by the barking, as they sounded territorial and deranged. Jem called me on my mobile after they'd calmed down, and asked me if I'd seen him walking past. I told her I had, and remarked about the dogs acting insane as he went by. She also said it was weird, as her dog Muttley had never acted so berserk before. We didn't know what to make of it, and as far as I'm aware, he was never seen again after that night. I had never witnessed so many animals acting so aggressively at an individual before, and I have always wondered what it was about him that made them behave like that. Not an overly creepy experience, but one weird night I will never forget. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.